What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. In today's episode, we are going to have a fun slash helpful video to talk about today. In the past, we have of course mentioned how many Pokemon are worth powering up, covered so many of them in a deep dive, but today's episode is focusing on the flip side of that argument. What are some Pokemon that are on the chopping block that could potentially not be as relevant, especially as like a number one position once Generation 5 gets here? We've received so many hints, and we of course know that Generation 5 is just around the corner. They will be slowly introduced into the game, so I figured I would go ahead and point out 5 Pokemon that I personally think you should not power up until the predecessor, the potential opponent, comes out, and we can of course see how good it is going to be. But there is some major potential in relation to the stats as well as the moveset, so I'm very excited to get into today's episode. If you do enjoy this type of content, if it is helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and get this out there. This is going to be a very hard list to go through because there's going to be a lot of favorites. There's going to be a lot of long-term value Pokemon on this list. Trust me, I am aware. Machamp is literally my favorite Pokemon in this entire game, and just discussing it today, it's a little bit of a tragedy, but it is what it is. We obviously want the best of the best when you are talking about from like a raid perspective, for example. So we've got Machamp. And the reason why we are talking about it is from that fighting type perspective. So in this case, Machamp has been the #1 fighting type attacker since it has been introduced into the game, having that just absolutely incredible moveset of counter and dynamic punch. It has been a force throughout the entire time. A lot of people have really enjoyed getting themselves a Machamp. But what we are talking about today is a reason why you don't need to invest in any more of them. I already have like a full team. I'm not going to touch anymore. I'm not going to power up anymore unless it's like an extreme circumstance where you get a lucky, a weather boost, you know, something like that. But for the most part, what I am saying is I am not going to power up any more Machamps until I see what happens with Conkeldurr. So Conkeldurr, by the way, is a pure fighting type Pokemon from Generation 5. And the reason why we're talking about this Pokemon in particular is going to be for 2 different reasons. Number 1, check out the difference between the stats. When you take a look at that attack stat specifically, Conkeldurr does have the option of propelling past Machamp, and it has a little bit of wiggle room if you want to look at it that way, where, for example, we've seen in the past, Niantic doesn't always give the most ideal moveset. I think Conkeldurr does have a little bit of room to afford not having the most ideal moveset and still being the best. For the next Pokemon, I'm just breaking hearts on this one. We've got Raikou. Now, Raikou is in a similar situation as Machamp, where it has been very dominant ever since it got introduced into the game. We ended up seeing that move Wild Charge, and it just took the world by storm. It's held on to the #1 position from the electric typing for a very, very, very long time. And in this case, you know, we're sitting here saying like, well, could a Pokemon like Raikou be bulletproof? We've seen it last through so many generations, where Gen 3 got introduced, held on to it. Gen 4 got introduced, Pokemon like Electivire and Magnezone, it's still held on to it. But I do think that Generation 5 is going to be the generation where Raikou loses its final spot. And that Pokemon is Thundurus. So Thundurus has 2 different forms: Incarnate form on the left side, and then we've got Therian form on the center. And with these 2 Pokemon, by the way, they are a legendary set of Pokemon with 2 different forms, so they could potentially be released later in the game, you know, later in 2020. Just because it's legendary, they tend to kind of, you know, fall out sequentially. So that does buy some time for Raikou, so if you still wanted to invest in it, you could. Just know that 6, 7, 8 months from now, it could be somewhat irrelevant. Just keep that in the back of your mind. But the reason why we are putting both of these Pokemon on the list is because both forms actually have the potential to outperform a Raikou. Go ahead and check them out. We're, of course, going to take a look at both of the different forms. You've got that Thundurus Therian form with an insane attack stat. So much room for improvement, so much room for, you know, a potential bad moveset. Still holding on to that #1 spot, of course, compared to a Raikou's stats. Yeah, it's looking really good for Thundurus just in general. A lot of people predicted that Thundurus would be a very solid option once Generation 5 got here. But like we kind of mentioned, it has a lot of wiggle room to where even if it didn't get like a stab effective move, it could still end up potentially being the #1 spot. So just keep that in mind. I think that these two Pokemon are a very exciting set of Pokemon and a lot of major potential to take over that #1 spot from the electric typing. Let's go ahead and move into the #3 spot, and that is Tyranitar. Now, a lot of people are not going to see this one coming. We are going to, of course, talk about Tyranitar, but it is not going to be from the rock typing. We've already seen a Pokemon like Rampardos kind of propel ahead in that way, but today, instead, we're going to be talking about the dark typing. So Tyranitar has faced a lot of competition from the dark typing, especially in Generation 4, where we saw a Pokemon like Weavile, where it technically had a higher DPS, not a higher TDO, so Tyranitar is still considered to be the #1 option from the dark typing. There's going to be a lot of trouble on the horizon, though, because we have a Pokemon that possesses the dark typing that has the major potential to take over that #1 spot, and that is Hydreigon. So Hydreigon is a dual type of dark as well as dragon. We're going to address dragon later on in this video, just like from a general perspective. But taking a look at it from the dark typing, go ahead and check out the stats for this Pokemon. And when you compare it to Tyranitar, you can see clearly that there is some major potential for Hydreigon to take over that #1 spot. Of course, moveset dependent. A lot of major potential. Now, there is something that I do want to bring up specifically for Tyranitar that I think is worth mentioning. And that's the idea that Tyranitar actually does not have the ideal moveset in Pokemon Go. It's got Bite, it's got Crunch, and both of those moves get beat by other things like Foul Play, for example. And in this case, the reason why I bring that up is because Tyranitar has been good because Tyranitar is good. The moveset has held it back slightly, so there is some future potential moving Tyranitar up. If we're excluding things like Mega Evolutions, we're talking just pure stats right now, how the game is created. Tyranitar could be made better if it got a better moveset. In that case, it would make it a lot closer between Tyranitar and Hydreigon, but I do think that Hydreigon has some major potential to take over that #1 spot from the dark typing. Let's go ahead and move into the #4 spot. Now, this Pokemon, oh my gosh, is going to be insane. Now, instead of talking about the Pokemon that it could potentially replace, I wanted to go ahead and highlight Volcarona first. So Volcarona has an amazing set of stats. It also has an interesting typing of the Bug/Fire. But the reason why we are specifically talking about Volcarona today is the idea that it has the threat of overtaking two different types from the Bug typing, from the Fire typing. So this is just kind of like a blanket statement. For example, like on the Bug typing, I don't think a lot of people have too much trouble powering up those Pokemon. Like, they don't worry about it as much. Maybe you've powered up a Scizor, maybe you powered up a Pinsir, something like that. But for the most part, people don't invest all of their Stardust in Bug-type Pokemon. So from that regard, I don't think there's going to be that much of an announcement. I do think that Volcarona possesses the capability of becoming the #1 Bug-type attacker, but I think that a lot of people haven't necessarily invested a lot of Stardust in Bug-types just in general. Just know that this Pokemon could end up being one of the better Bug-type Pokemon and also giving Bug-type some viability because of its stats. Anytime you end up with some type of tie, you could finally see some Bug-type Pokemon making it into like a top 5 slot versus something like a Psychic-type Pokemon. I think Volcarona possesses that capability. When you get over to the flip side of it, and you start talking about Fire, though, there's of course a lot of competition with that. You're talking about something like a Moltres, for example, maybe even an Entei, Pokemon like that. I do think that Volcarona still possesses the capability of overcoming those Pokemon dependent on the moveset. There's a little bit of wiggle room, of course, in relation to that attack stat that we talked about. Volcarona could be one of those Pokemon that dominates from two different typings, similar to something like a Roserade with grass as well as poison typing. I think Volcarona is a Pokemon that you do want to take a look out for and maybe put a little bit of a pause towards your Fire team, towards your Bug team, and just wait for this Pokemon to come out. The last and final set of Pokemon that I wanted to talk about is just in general, and that is the Dragon-type Pokemon. There are so many excellent Pokemon coming in to Generation 5 that, of course, possess the Dragon typing. We're not even necessarily just talking about legendary Pokemon. There's even one or two non-legendaries that also threaten Pokemon like Rayquaza, Salamence. There's just so many of them that do have the potential to overtake it. So just in general, it is amazing to see how big of a deal Dragon-type Pokemon are in the game now. in the future of the game. It is insane how many good Dragon-type Pokemon we are going to see. You've got a few Rayquazas, you've got a few Salamances. Just call it a day and wait until Generation 5 gets here, because there are some incredible Dragon-type Pokemon, so definitely keep that in mind. Anyways, I hope you did enjoy this video. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully you are kind of learning like what I'm talking about. And Generation 5, once it gets here, you will be ready for it. And of course, have that Stardust ready to immediately replace the previous #1 spots. If you did enjoy this video, let me know in the comments section below. I would love to know what Pokemon you are most excited about from today's episode. Let me know in the comments section below, and I will see you next time. If you want to develop a deeper connection, I would highly recommend you to check out Patreon. We've got a lot of really cool things going on over there. Check out all of these supporters that we have. We are almost up to 100. We are also posting some special content, some behind the scenes work. And if that is the type of thing that interests you, I would highly recommend you to check it out.